All right, back with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News and Talk. Last week, Illinois lawmakers were in for the final 3 days of legislative session, and a lot of the focus was on the Safety Act and changes to no cash bail that's set to take effect January 1st. This after a very contentious political season where even the governor said that there has to be changes to the Safety Act to clarify what he said was misinformation. And a lot of the consternation there was what is a detainable offense and what is not a detainable offense. So we waited for weeks and weeks and weeks. We were told by bill sponsors that there's just going to be technical changes made, but when they revealed those amendments in the final days of the legislative session, those amendments weren't just technical. They were pretty substantive in adding a whole list of different types of crimes that people can be detained for pre-trial. And just merely having to add those to the law had Republicans saying that this was not fear-mongering on their part for raising the alarm over the past 2 years on this. And it's an acknowledgement that the law had a ton of holes in it. So this is obviously something that's going to impact law enforcement. We have a lawsuit that is from dozens of sheriffs and state's attorneys across the state that's going to be heard in Kaitschuk County possibly this week. Now, they're scheduled for Wednesday to have oral arguments, and then the following week, the judge expected to issue an order in this case as to whether or not the law will be implemented January 1st. This now might be derailed as you've got these changes that have yet to be sent to the governor to be signed, but we've got just less than 4 weeks before January 1st. So what's next for law enforcement? I talked with the Illinois Sheriff's Association Executive Director Jim Kaitschuk, and he shared with us some of the things they're thinking of, because now they have to kind of reevaluate, and they were ramping up, getting ready for the January 1st implementation, and now it's something that there's a little bit more uncertainty in how they move forward with this. So here's Jim Kaitschuk from the Illinois Sheriff's Association talking about, what's next for law enforcement when it comes to evaluating how to apply the Safety Act and pretrial fairness.
I think that we had 2 months plus of dialogue, 2 months heavy of dialogue for sure, with both the House and the Senate Democrats and members of law enforcement. And I feel like, there was a lot of progress made in those conversations. And ultimately that, our concerns, many of them were they certainly heard them. They gave us an opportunity to provide input and direction on what we thought the impact of different things were going to be. So, I appreciate the fact that we had that opportunity. All along, I wish we would have had more of that opportunity at the onset before the bill ever became law to begin with. But where we sit right now, I think, is a vast improvement of where we would have been had we not had this change prior to as of January 1.
And again, those changes range from adding serious crimes to the list of detainable offenses, and how that moving forward is going to be up to judges to have certain discretion. They also changed the definition of willful flight. They also changed a definition as to, being able to hold people who pose a threat to a person or persons and the community. These were all things that they needed to clarify, because law enforcement said there were some substantial problems with who they would be able to hold behind bars, and how they would ultimately go about getting people, compelling them to show up for a court date to face their alleged crimes. So these obviously are some changes that are impacting law enforcement, but other changes needed. And when I talked with Jim on Friday, we discussed a little bit of how there's still some gaps here. There's still some things that need to be clarified. And what's unfortunate is we may get to a point where it's going to take somebody getting hurt, or it's going to take an example to show these glaring errors that some say still is in the Safety Act before there's substantive changes made to plug those holes. And that's not necessarily something that you want to have happen, is to be reactive, right? But what are some of the things that might still need to be addressed? Again, Jim Kaitschuk from the Illinois Sheriff's Association.
Until we start moving forward on some things, I mean, there are a variety of other issues. Obviously, we still have, there's an expanded list of detainable offenses, which is, good because the list, in our opinion, was obviously very narrow to begin with. They gave the courts more discretion, which certainly is as they should. But I think there are still some, it puts an awful lot of pressure on the courts too to make some of these determinations. And we still have a lot of unknown about how we move forward. We've got the shortest thing that we've got to deal with, or the quickest thing that we've got to deal with right now, is how we change things, moving that now we're less than a month away from January 1, where we've been developing policies and procedures, granted with a lot of questions, about how we were going to implement things in January. And now there's going to be kind of a reboot on that to see how these changes affect the different policies and practices that we were going to put in place in January. So, we're still assessing everything in terms of where we go from here. Again, I hope that, we don't have to go down this path again, that we will, have better consultation moving forward about how things might change in the future as opposed to reacting to them. So, but again, I have to give credit to them for listening and heeding a lot of the concerns, even though it was painful, I think, for everybody to have to do so.
Now, one other thing that I've got to do is delve deep into the idea of getting rid of bail altogether, getting rid of bond altogether, and the surety there, and how that's going to move forward, and as far as people who don't show up for trial. Because they did do some modification there. Last week we reported that there were still some looming concerns before they even revealed the amendments about issuing warrants for people who don't appear for their court date. So we need to better understand how that operates, and what about the sureties, those bonds that do go into coffers of local sheriff's offices, and how is that going to be handled moving forward after January 1st? Still a lot of unanswered questions. And in particular, you've got the lawsuit that dozens of sheriffs and state's attorneys across the state have filed. Is that still going to be heard? I got indication late last week that might not happen, so we'll see ultimately how this plays out. But this week we're expecting something, either an update on the court case or a hearing having taking place in Kankakee County on Wednesday. But Jim Kaitschuk with the Illinois Sheriff's Association, he wasn't as intimately involved in those proceedings, though he's familiar with the arguments around that court case. But he says that ultimately it's still up in the air as to what's going to happen here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And like you said, I'm not intimately involved in that process or the status of the case, or the arguments. I mean, other than my, reading of the petition that was filed. So my understanding is they're going to plead their cases next week, in Kankakee, and then the judge will make a determination the following week. So I don't know, how it will be, what the process will be moving forward. My assumption would be is that arguments still will be made in terms of the position of the state's attorneys and those involved, that there are provisions that they believe still remain unconstitutional, and I guess the judge will have to make a determination as to whether or not he or she agrees.
So when that determination comes, still not known, and we'll get you an update here for that particular trajectory of the court case as soon as we find out. But it's going to be pretty tenuous, especially in the final few weeks here of December before January 1st starts. Is the judge going to hear the case and then make a determination that, hey, we're going to put an injunction on implementation of this until we get it all worked out through maybe even the Illinois Supreme Court? So it's fascinating, and it's right here in Illinois. Glad to keep you updated on it.